These two beautiful and intelligent friends would not have followed their boyfriends to a Christmas party if they had known what they had planned for them. If Doris and Sandy had always been friends, from the moment they met at the university, they clicked. Both were 18 years old, studying law in their first year. They had dreams of becoming successful lawyers, helping people and changing the world. They were roommates in a small apartment in Abuja, and although they didn't have much money, they were contented. They spent their days studying hard, planning their futures, and laughing at the little things in life. Life in the university wasn't easy. Doris and Sandy had to juggle between lectures, assignments, and exams. They often stayed up late trying to finish their work before the deadlines. Their parents sent them the little they could, and every month they would scrap for the rest, carefully budgeting their money for foods and necessities. They didn't mind the struggle because they knew that with hard work they would one day make it in life. But things started to change the day Doris met Ralph. He was 40 years old, wealthy, and confident. Ralph wasn't a student, but he often visited the university, attending various events and sometimes hanging out near the law department. He first noticed Doris when she was sitting in the school courtyard studying. Doris had always been quiet, focused on her studies, and never thought much about men. But when Ralph walked up to her, he smiled, and she couldn't help but smile back. "You're always so focused, Doris," he said. "I admire that in a young woman. Tell me, what's your dream?" Doris was taken aback by his attention. She had been taught not to trust strangers, especially older men, but something about Ralph's kind smile and smooth words made her feel at ease. She told him about her dream of becoming a lawyer and changing the world. "That's a noble dream," Ralph said. "I could help you with that. I know people and I can provide for you. You don't have to worry about the struggle anymore." His offer sounded too good to be true. Doris wasn't sure what to think, but she felt a spark of hope. It was a change to escape the daily worries and challenges of being a student. Soon after, Ralph started sending Doris gifts, designer clothes, expensive shoes, and even a new phone. He would take her out to expensive restaurants. She could hardly believe her luck. Sandy noticed the changes too. Doris started looking different, dressing better, and acting more confident. "What's been spoiling you, Dor?" Sandy asked one day as they were studying together. "His name is Ralph. He's a businessman. He says he wants to help me. He's been so kind." Sandy was curious but didn't think too much at first. She was happy for Doris, seeing how the gift made her friends so happy. But then, Doris started spending more and more time with Ralph, and Sandy began to feel left out. One evening, Sandy sat in her apartment flipping through a magazine. When Doris came in with a big smile on her face, "You won't believe what Ralph just bought me," Doris said excitedly. Sandy looked up, her curiosity piqued. "What did he get you now? An expensive handbag?" Sandy said, her eyes sparkling, "And he's going to take me to a party this weekend, a big one." Sandy frowned. "A party? That sounds fun, but—" Doris interrupted. "You should come too. He's got a friend. Maybe you can meet him." Sandy paused. She wasn't sure about this. Ralph seemed nice enough, but she didn't want to be too involved with him. She had always been more conscious than Doris, who was easily swept away by excitement. However, after some persuasion, Sandy agreed she wanted to be happy for her friend, so she decided to go along with it. Little did she know that was the beginning of a new world, a world that would pull them deeper into a web of temptation and deceit. The weekend came, and Doris reluctantly agreed to meet John's friend, Mark. He was just as charming as Ralph, but there was something about him that made Doris uneasy. He was handsome and well dressed, with a confident smile that seemed to promise excitement. Like Ralph, Max showered Sandy with attention and flattery. They went out for dinner and the conversation flowed easily. Before she knew it, Sandy found herself attracted to him, despite the small voice in her head telling her to be careful. "You're a beautiful woman, Sandy," Max said, leaning in closer to her. "I think you and Doris are both very special. I want to spoil you too." Sally wasn't used to the kind of attention, but the idea of living a life without worry, a life where money and luxury were within reach, was too tempting to ignore. As the weeks went by, Doris and Sandy spent more and more time with Ralph and Mark. The two men took care of them, paying for their meals, their clothes, and even their school fees. The girls no longer had to struggle to make ends meet. They went on shopping spree, attended fancy parties, and started living a life that their parents could only dream of providing. They stopped going home during holidays, telling their parents that they had school commitments. Their parents, who had always been concerned about their well-being, tried to get them to return home. But the girls always made excuses. They didn't want to go back to their old lives, a life of small apartment, old clothes, and financial struggles. They had tasted something sweeter and they didn't want to let go. As the girls' lifestyle changed, so did their priorities. They started skipping lectures, no longer worried about their studies. They bribed lecturers with gifts and money, and soon their grades improved. Their friends started to notice the changes too. Everyone in the department began to envy Doris and Sandy for their sudden wealth and success. But there was a price to pay for all of this. Doris and Sandy were too focused on the material things to notice the dangers creeping in. They had become distracted by their new lifestyle, forgetting the values they had once held dear. They had stopped thinking about their dreams, their studies, and the people who loved them. And now they were about to make a decision that would change everything. The stage was set. Their lives were about to take a dark turn. As the weeks went by, Doris and Sandy found themselves increasingly captivated by the life Ralph and Mark provided for them. Their modest dormitory apartment felt like a distant mirror as they moved into a world of luxury and excess. What had once been a dream seemed to unfold before them, and it was nothing like that they had never imagined. Expensive gifts, dinner at fancy restaurants, night out on town because of their new became their new reality. The girls, once humble and hardworking, were now living a life many only saw in movies. Ralph and Mark showered them with presents, but the gifts weren't just about the items. They were a way to keep the girls close, to make them dependent on the men. Doris and Sandy, thrilled by their attention, became more and more eager to please them. Ralph had a way of making Sandy feel special, like she was the only one who mattered. Why Ralph did the same with Doris. The girls didn't notice how much they were changing. They didn't see how the men were slowly gaining control over them. One afternoon, as Doris and Sandy were enjoying their lunch in a trendy cafe, Doris couldn't help but smile as she looked down at the brand new designer handbag that Ralph had bought for her. "This is the best thing that ever happened to me," Doris sighed dreamily, tracing her fingers over the smooth leather. Sandy couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy, though she quickly pushed it aside. She had seen the way Mark looked at her and felt a flutter every time he gave her a compliment. In her mind, there was no turning back now. She was far too gone. She had become addicted to the life just as Doris had. "Don't you think we have changed a little?" Sandy said, looking up from her salad. Doris frowned, unsure what Sandy meant. I mean, we're not the same anymore. We don't even care about our studies. We're always out buying things, going to parties. Sandy said, her voice thinned and uncertainty. Doris waved her hand dismissively. We're still in school, Sandy. We're just living life, you know. We deserve this after everything we've been through. Besides, we don't need to worry about passing tests anymore. We've got the money to get through. Sandy looked at her friend, and for a brief moment she wondered if Doris was right, but deep down she felt a growing sense of unease. Doris and Sandy were eventually invited for a party that Ralph and Mark were throwing. So they skipped school and left Abuja for Lagos. The city of Lagos was everything Doris and Sandy had imagined. Bright light, fancy cars, and the sense of excitement that hung in the air. They arrived in the evening, tired from the flight but full of anticipation for what the weekend would bring. As they checked into their luxury hotel, they couldn't believe their luck. Ralph and Mark were already there waiting for them. They greeted the girls with a smile that seemed almost too wide, their eyes glinting with excitement. This is going to be the best weekend of your lives, Mark said, his voice low and filled with promise. Just relax and enjoy yourself. Doris and Sandy smiled back, eager to see what the night had in store. They changed into their best outfits, the ones Ralph and Mark had bought for them, and headed out to a nightclub that was famous for its exclusive parties. The music plunged through the air, and the moment they walked in, all eyes were on them. They felt like celebrities, dressed in expensive clothes and surrounded by people who were living the high life. The night was filled with laughter, dancing, and loud music. Ralph and Mark kept close to the girls, making sure they were always entertained. Drinks flowed freely, and soon Doris and Sandy began to feel the effect of the alcohol. They weren't used to drinking much, but tonight they didn't care. Everything felt like a dream, and they didn't want to wake up. As the night wore on, the party grew wilder. People began dancing even more recklessly, and the club felt like it was spinning with the beat of the music. Doris felt a warm sense of freedom she hadn't felt in a long time, and Sandy, though slightly more cautious, was swept up in the excitement. Mark had already taken her by the hand, pulling her to the dance floor. Why Ralph had Doris laughing, their bodies swaying in time with the music. But as the party went on, something began to feel off. The atmosphere started to shift. The men, once charming and attentive, became colder, more distant. The conversation around them blurred, and the laughter seemed forced. Doris and Sandy were still oblivious, caught up in the excitement, their judgment clouded by the alcohol and the thrill of their new life. Around midnight, the music suddenly stopped, the light flickered and then dimmed, casting long shadows across the dance floor. Doris looked around in confusion, her head spinning. Don't worry, ladies, Ralph said smoothly, his voice now carrying an edge that Doris hadn't noticed before. We're just going to take this to a more private location. Trust us, it will be worth it. Mark's grin was wide but tight, almost predatory. The girls exchanged uneasy glances, but before they could protest, they were ushered out of the club into a sleek black car waiting outside. They were ushered into an abandoned house. Ladies, welcome, one of the men said. His voice was gruff and cold, sending a shiver down Doris's spine. We've been waiting for you, another man said, his eyes glittering with a strange intensity. The realization hit Doris like a slap on her face. They weren't the men they had trusted. They weren't the men who had treated them to dinners and expensive gifts. These men were something else entirely, something darker. A moment of pure terror washed over Doris, but it was too late. The door slammed shut behind them, locking them in. Let's have some fun, John said, his smile never reaching his eyes. Doris's body went cold. Her blood ran as icy as the silence that had fallen over the room. Something was terribly wrong. This wasn't a party. This wasn't a getaway, it was a trap. They had walked right into it. Sandy opened her mouth to scream, but before she could make a sound, a sharp pain shot through her arm. She looked down to see a needle stuck in her skin, and before she could react, everything around her went black. The next thing she heard was Doris's voice, her voice faint but filled with fear. Sandy, no! And then everything went dark. Ralph woke up with a pound. Doris woke up with a pounding headache. She blinked, disoriented, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The air was cold and the floor beneath her was rough and damp. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness and she saw the broken walls and empty windows surrounding her. She tried to sit up, but her hands and legs were tied to a chair, and the ropes dug into her skin painfully. Panic surged in her chest and she struggled in the bindings, but they couldn't give. Sandy, she whispered, her voice trembling. Sandy, where are you? She looked around in the dimly lit room, her heart racing. It wasn't the party she had imagined. It wasn't the fun getaway she had been promised. There was something far worse. She saw Sandy lying unconsciously on the floor beside her body limp and unmoving. Doris's breath hitched in her throat, her heart sinking into her stomach. Sandy, she cried out, struggling against the rope, but it was no use. Her hands were tied to the chair tightly. From somewhere in the darkness, she heard footsteps approaching. Doris's breath caught in her throat as she turned her head. A man stepped into view and she immediately recognized him. He was Mark, but he was different now. His smile was gone, replaced by a cold, emotional expression. His eyes were dark. You are awake, Mark said, his voice eerily calmly. Good. What's this? What's happening? Doris's voice shook as she spoke, her mind racing for an explanation, but no answers came. Where are we? You are safe for now, Mark said, almost shockingly, but that won't last long. You and your friend are going to be part of something special. Don't worry, it will be quick. Doris's body went cold at the mention of something special. She tried to scream, but the fear had a grip on her throat, making it impossible to form words. It's all clicked. It wasn't a party. This wasn't some fun night out. It was a trap, a horrible dark trap. She looked around to search for something, anything that she could use to escape, but all she could see were shadows and broken furniture. The room felt like it was closing in on her. Mark stepped closer, his footsteps slow and desperate. Behind him, she noticed the door open and a few other men entered. They were wearing the charming men she had once trusted. These men were cold, calculating. Please, just let us go, Doris begged, her voice breaking. We didn't do anything wrong. We just wanted to have fun. You're not going anywhere, Mark said, his eyes twisted. You're going to help us with something much more important. Before Doris could react, she heard another set of footsteps behind her. Ralph. His presence was enough to send a shiver around her spine. He stepped forward, his eyes on hard and unfailing. The same man who was once kind to her and promised her lots of things was now cold, was more than a stranger. This is what it was all for, Doris. John said coldly, his tone devoid of any warmth. Everything you've enjoyed, all the luxury, the gifts, it was all leading to this. You were never meant to have any of it. You were just the bait. Doris' heart stopped. The words didn't make sense. Her mind struggled to process them, but they ran in her ears like an alarm. Bait, she said. You lied to us, you never cared. John's gaze was piercing. You were useful. Now it's time for you to serve your purpose. Please, no, Doris shouted, her voice breaking with terror. What do you want from us? But before she could say anything, the door behind John opened wide. Another figure stepped in. The man was older, with deep piercing eyes that seemed to burn into her soul. His clothes were dark, almost blending into the shadow. He didn't look like anyone she had ever seen before. He was a stranger, yet he eluded a terrible authority. Ah, you're awake, the man said, his voice low and menacing. He stepped forward. Good, we can begin. The words made Doris' stomach drop. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew deep down it wasn't good. it wasn't anything good for her. Please, Doris cried again, tears streaming down her eyes. We didn't ask for this. We're just living our lives. The men's eye glowed with cold amusement. You were chosen because you were easy to manipulate. All the luxury, the attention, the power, it made you weak. You wanted more, and now you will give us what we need, your life, your soul. As the man approached, Doris made one final frantic effort. With every pound of strength she could muster, she jerked her arms one last time against the rope. The binding on her wrist gave way just enough for her to break free. Her heart pounded in her chest as she scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sharp pain in her hands where the ropes had been. She reached for Sandy, but the man saw her move and slung in with the knife. In a flash, Doris' body reacted before her mind could catch up. She shoved the man away with all her strength, and for the first time, the man fell. Her eyes widened in surprise, but Doris didn't stop to watch. She grabbed Sandy, pulling her with all her remaining strength, even though her friend was weak and barely conscious. Come on, Sandy, we have to go, Doris shouted, dragging her towards the door. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know if there was any hope, but she knew they had to get out. Behind them, chaos erupted. The men shouted in anger. But Doris' feet moved faster than she thought possible. She pulled through the door and into the dark corridor. The sound of footsteps chasing after them, it was a nightmare, a blur of adrenaline and fear. But Doris couldn't afford to look back. She had to keep running. They stumbled into the night, and Doris' heart skipped a beat as she saw the flashing light of a car in the distance. She didn't know if it was a friend or another danger, but she didn't care. She pulled Sandy along, each step harder than the last, but she couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close to freedom. With every ounce of her strength, Doris dragged Sandy towards the car. As they got closer, they saw a figure step out, a woman from a nearby market. Her face full of shock as she saw the two girls, bruised and wounded. Help, 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 Doris cried out, barely able to form the words. The woman grasped, quickly running to their side. What happened to you? She asked, her voice trembling with concern. We need to get out of here, Doris said urgently. Her voice barely a whisper, but now, still shaking from the terror of the past few hours, the woman without hesitation helped Doris lift Sandy into the back of the car. She quickly drove them away from the abandoned building, heading towards the nearest hospital. Doris held Sandy's hand tightly, feeling both relief and terror at the same time. Sandy was still unconscious, her body weak and fragile, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. As the car sped through the dark street, Doris could feel the weight of what had happened pressing on her chest. She had almost lost everything. Her mind was flooded with images of the men of the ritual, of the coldness in her eyes. They hadn't just betrayed her, they had planned to kill her, to sacrifice her. By the time they reached the hospital, Doris was trembling all over. The doctors and nurses rushed to help Doris and Sandy, and they took them to in for treatment. Hours later, when Sandy was awake, Doris sat beside her, holding her hand. Sandy's eyes were red from the drugs, but she smiled weakly when she saw Doris sitting there. We made it, Doris. We're alive, Doris whispered as with caressed voice. Doris nodded, with her own tears finally coming out. I thought I was going to lose you, she said quietly. I thought I was going to lose everything. Sandy squeezed her hand. Well, okay, we are safe. But deep down, Doris knew the truth. They were alive, but they would never be the same. They had both been changed by what had happened. Their lives, their choices had led them to that dark place. And while they had escaped with their lives, they could never forget the price they had to pay. The next morning, the police arrived. They had already tracked down the building where Doris and Sandy had been held, and they were gathering evidence against John and Ralph and the others involved in the sinister plot. Doris and Sandy were questioned. They are referring to making headlines across the city. The men were arrested, but Doris's fear remained. What if someone else had been targeted? What if they were owned? That was just the beginning.